Good day. My name is Donnie Wetzel Jr. and hope everybody's doing well, enjoying the conference. Hope everybody's safe and sound. It's interesting times that we do these presentations on videos and I can't see and respond to the crowd and see smiles, see frowns, understand if I'm bombing or doing well. Today I'm going to be talking about telling our stories and controlling the narrative. Put that image of a cup of coffee because it reminds me of storytelling. When you get into somebody's house and make some coffee and you start to visit and hear a little bit about what's going on and learn from each other. So I'll be talking about this today because it's very important. It's a lot of the initiative that I've always tried to push, especially at the youth level, and especially at the tribal level. We need more folks telling stories from the tribal perspective and how it is something that can create a powerful movement and change. So storytelling is something that has been part of our oral traditions for thousands and thousands of years. And many of these stories, they hold the wisdom and the knowledge of who we are. Some of our stories tap into values and lessons learned. I am Amskapi Pakani. I'm Blackfeet. In our creation stories and stories of Katuwis and Scarface, and there's so many values in those things that I just can't believe sometimes how powerful they are. When I was working in my younger years, as a young adult, I was working with tribal leaders and various elders, and I was sitting with a bunch of elders, and one of them said that they had all these questions. They met with all these youth, all these young ones were sitting around asking these questions about this and that, and what's the meaning of this, and why do we do that? And so the elder told the creation story and shared it out to all these students and these young people. When he was done, he asked them, "Do you have any more questions?" And they said, "No." So these stories have deep meaning. They're very, very powerful, and they're very, very connecting to who we are and who our ancestors were and what we're about, especially as Indigenous people. So those values and lessons make us who we are. And, you know, there's always many of our tribes, our tribes are very unique in their own ways and their own stories, their own languages, their ceremonies, all of these different things. But with many tribes, they have usually a trickster or an opposite. With Blackfeet, it's Napi. I understand, and I hope I don't say this wrong, but the coyote is a pretty strong person and figure within Salish stories. And so you get to learn these things here and there. If you don't know a lot about it, I always encourage people to ask and to just come in a humble way, because they're amazing and they're very powerful and they bring clarity to life. And they teach us these lessons. I once had somebody tell me that when colonization was moving and coming into our tribes, a lot of the stories that taught us the opposite side of negativity, what not to do, they were pretty specific and they're pretty direct on, you just don't do these things. And what I was told by this elder is that they took those out in their writing. They took them out because they felt they were too harsh. And these things taught us the heavy side. It's always a balance, and everything in life is a balance. We got to have the bad and the good, because we don't understand the good without the bad. And everything is always in balance and maintaining that balance. So the lessons within our stories are very powerful. Oral traditions um, kept our people alive and kept all these connections and all this knowledge within our own people. And this isn't just our tribal nations of Montana or the US. It goes back. It goes back thousands and thousands of years. It goes back across that ocean. These lessons that were taught through storytelling. And to have it be oral was a way that they kept them, because, written documents, different kind of things that came later on, were meant to lock things down, make it absolute. And without our oral traditions and our stories, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't know who we were. We'd be here, but we wouldn't know who we were, I guess I should say. Our histories and our narratives tap into who we are and who our family is, the connections with the lands and the sacred areas on land that mean so much to us, no matter where we're at. The idea of multidimensional versus linear. The linear topic is writing it down left to right. There it is. It's locked. I was sitting in Cheyenne country once, and a prominent traditional leader spoke to me about the multi-dimensions of the Cheyenne Nation. And I've come through my own journey to understand these things in our Amskapi Bekani Nation. And every tribe seems to have these multiple levels of storytelling and understandings that reach up into the universe, down into the earth. And it's just fascinating to me. And I could sit and learn as much as I can. If that's all that I had to do in life, I would be a very, very, very happy man. But these perceptions of multi-dimensions in linear, it's something that adds different angles. And I can equate it to like a detective. So what you read in our history books is one side of the story. And you never know. Maybe someone just sat there and wrote something down, and since it was written down, it was taken as that's what happened. I was visiting with a few folks about some stories over in Abzalika Nation, and they were very interesting. And to sit and listen, there's so many sacred and beautiful and powerful areas over there. And I was out in one of the communities, and they were talking about one version of this story. And this is what happened. This is what I was told. Well, about 2 hours later, I brought that story up to another member of that community. And he said, well, that's their version. That's, that was passed down to them. Let me tell you my great grandfather's version of that. This is what he's seen. And it was so beautiful. And it really opened my mind to sit here and think that, wow, it's perceptions. It's how we see things, I mean, there's no absolute in it, I mean, there's, I don't know enough about it, but art has that concept. Well, this is how I look at it, or well, this is how I look at it. And as a detective, you just don't go and listen to one person when you're trying to solve a crime. If you watch any detective show, you go and you have witnesses, and you talk to them. Are these stories aligned? Or, well, there was something different with that one. And as you the more you talk to, the more clear the picture gets. And, we just don't do that enough in society today, even in education. It's a one-sided story often told. And that's the beauty and power of oral traditions in telling our stories and storytelling. of course, much of my work, I really push the strength-based narrative and the balance of that and what that brings. We often lean so heavily on the negative, especially in our communities here. We lean on the negative. It's often the only story you hear, and we rarely hear the strength. And again, this here is my opinion. We talk heavily on historical trauma. Well, what about our historical resilience? What if we flipped that script and had that as our main focus? And I often equate that to what are the positive? What is the energy that comes out of our communities that is positive? Oftentimes it links right directly to basketball. And I sit and I think, and I have many discussions with youth. And what if we described our basketball teams like we often describe our communities or how people see our reservations? We just don't do it. We don't talk in those ways. We don't talk in these outside perceptions when we're talking about basketball. With basketball, we talk of strength, pride, tradition, beauty, strength, and the whole community surrounds that. You're drawn to the positive energies. And so I think if we did that more, it'd be a flip of how we're kind of told how to see things. With a lot of the youth conferences I've done, it gets students. And I remember sitting up in Browning, Montana. I grew up in Browning and left there at a young age and moved all around the state. But I loved Browning. It was one of the greatest places in the world to me. I was, of course, young and running around and dogs everywhere and eating food in whatever house I walked into. It was just the community raising the child. It was the best place in the world. We could light fireworks whenever we wanted, all of these different kind of things. And as I moved around in my life and got older, I'd hear people talk about Browning and saying, "Oh boy, you better roll your windows up when you go through that community. Geez, watch out, dogs running everywhere." Well, there's reasons our Blackfeet people had such a connection to dogs. That we had the dog days. They saved and they assisted us. They were connected to many of our ways and helped us as we moved and traveled from place to place. And so when I went back, we did a youth conference there, and the students named it Connecting Cultures for Unity. And they had the unity is YOU-nity, meaning it starts with us. And one of the main concepts that we focused on sitting with these Blackfeet youth in the Browning High School in Hart Butte region, let's brag up Browning. Let's flip the script on these misconceptions of what Browning is. Let's talk about the beauty. Let's talk about the strength. And the kids lined up an amazing tour. And we had kids from Great Falls, from Hayes Lodgeville, from Shelby, I think, showed up, Valier, Cutbank, and all these different groups, along with our Blackfeet youth, came and were able to walk around Browning and be told the stories and the significance of this place and that place, to sit with elders and really brag up our community. And it was cool to see our Native youth just proud. We also did that with a lot of our work there with the Flathead Youth Initiative. The students celebrated that first year. They put out positive messages of hope, of courage, of unity, and folks from all over the western side of the state of Montana showed up to that and got to know each other personally, face to face, and not reading about it in the newspaper or looking at everything negatively. So I've always encouraged a lot of those things, but it really comes from the youth. They have a beautiful way of understanding that and just working with them. You talk about recognize the beauty here. in what that can bring once you start to connect to those creation stories and the stories of values, to the stories of who we are and what to do, what not to do. It brings clarity to your life. It connects you to something that is bigger than you. It connects you to your ancestors. So the beauty of our oral traditions, I mean, I could do the entire presentation on that and tell various stories that I've learned. And I just believe in these things. And I love that image there because that's it, you know. Any more modern day times, that's a kitchen table maybe, or sitting out in a fire pit. Our children there, an elder speaking. We all have a say in something. It's just top of the world to me. So you look at all these things that I just spoke about. It was specifically here in our region. Um, indigenous, you know, that term is highly used nowadays. But what does the term indigenous truly mean? Originating or occurring naturally in a particular place, native to that region. I was watching a music documentary, and I'm a music junkie. I'm a old school 70s R&B, soul, funk, Ohio players, Earth, Wind and Fire, Santana, Jimi Hendrix, all of these groups that I was brought up with. My dad had his records. I sat in the record store with him as he showed me, oh, this is a good one. I remember these things. And music is huge to me. And you talk about storytelling, that's center to much of music as it is today, especially now in the hip hop rap genre. But I was watching this music documentary, and it was about hip hop, and it was about hip hop in London. And there was this underground um, hip hop just force that was happening, and they're interviewing this young man, you know, white kid, saying that we have our own white indigenous gangs here. We speak of that in our rap music. And I never thought of it so much as I did right there, and realized that, oh yeah, British. I mean, that's their homelands, you know. So I was thinking of things in there. Indigenous means you're native to that region. In the United States, our indigenous nations are 2% of the population now, and there are tribal nations. Many of those numbers come from our plains region, our tribes of Montana. The state of Montana has the most tribes, more so than any other state in the U.S. But looking back, going across the oceans and realizing that there's storytelling, there's histories from every one of these regions, and they're indigenous to that place. They're connected to the land of that place. They're connected to the philosophies and the values. I have various pictures doing a search, you know, from everyone telling stories, and the power of that, and how songs tying into that adds a whole nother level, and how these things happen across the board. They happen within our families. If we talk about, well, my great grandpa, or this land over here, um, this happened, or whatever it may be. But you start to do those things, kids will sit down. I tell stories to my children as much as possible. My daughter, who's now an eighth grader, every night my wife read to her, and I told her a story. And she got two sides of that. And I tell you what, her mind is just open to all of the possibilities in the world. My son, who's a fourth grader, he's right there too. You know, that young man has an imagination like I could never I could never imagine that he would take it as high as he does sometimes. And he's funny. He's connected to just some beautiful things. Both of my children are growing up understanding a lot more of our Amskapi Bikuni ways. They're part of some of the ceremonies, and they're part of my journey as I reconnect, because we have youth very interested in this stuff. And I am truly blessed to have my kids have opportunities that I really didn't have. Yeah, I grew up on the Blackfeet Reservation, but some of these things weren't really there. Our tribes were only allowed to practice and do these things legally in 1978. And at that time, I was 5 years old, It's crazy, but those histories go all the way back across that ocean. I'm married to an amazing woman who has German and mainly Irish descendancy. And her grandmother shared a document about, so it'd be her great great grandfather was from Ireland, and he was basically a traditionalist in the Gaelic sense, because you go across that ocean, they had societies, they had clan systems. It's no different than our tribal nations today. Of course, there was a push that knocked some of those things out, usually a power push, a land grab, or whatever it may be. But many of those things were lost. And so her great great grandfather was arrested for teaching Gaelic traditions, songs, and language. And he was about to get sent to Australia, and he jumped ship and headed to America. I mean, you think of that. It's undeniable how powerful and connected we all are. If you got to go back, some of us may have 4 or 5 lineages leading to one place or another, but there's stories behind all that. And that story just blew my mind. And I was like, wow, that's just like some of the things that we've fought for here as native people to this land. And, within each and every one of us, there's hundreds of stories, and they maintain those histories of who we are, where we come from. And, I'm always up on, things happen, histories happen and change, and there's a ebb and flow of different things moving here and there. And within there, though, is all of these stories. And I want to take a moment now, if you have a piece of notebook, take your notebook out and write down, what are your histories? Just write them down and maybe think about them a little bit. And then also, do you know your stories? If not, who can you go to? But take a moment and write those down. If you're interested, I think it's a good thing, but that again is my opinion. I don't want to push nothing on nobody. But those images are absolutely phenomenal here on this page. So many of our stories have been lost, and with that comes lost knowledge. Like I said, at some point in so many of the DNA and the ancestry within each and every one of us, there was a push of power, colonization, or universal conformity, where, well, okay, we're going to forget who you were, and you're going to learn this way now. One story, one understanding. Some say that the winners of the wars get to tell the stories. And that is the case. I put that image of the movie 300. I don't know if you've seen it. If you haven't, I encourage you to do so, because it's a story of Sparta and Leonidas and the great Persian god Xerxes. And there's a moment that Xerxes is wiping out just indigenous people from Greece to Spain. All these places are just getting leveled, and Persia is just running shop. And he comes up to meet Leonidas, and he says, I want you to bend a knee to me. You guys will be able to live a good life. I'll give you your piece of land and go like that. And Leonidas is like, no, ain't going to do it. And there's this moment that Xerxes says, I will wipe away your histories. I will burn all of your books. I will erase every piece of your people's lives from the history books. No one will even know you have ever existed. And it's a really prominent moment in the movie that you're like, dang, you know? In a lot of ways, it happened to folks here, our tribal nations. It happened to folks in Europe, in Ireland, in Scotland. But those oral tradition kept us going. But I once was driving after presenting over in the east side at a school, and I was driving and I had the radio on, and it was in the beginning of the topic of fake news, and everyone's talking about, well, that's fake news, and I posted something on Facebook, and it said, everybody complaining about fake news. Our tribal nations or Indian countries been dealing with that forever. They're called history books. And I was kind of shocked at the response. And you think of that, though, and it's true. There isn't a lot of history on the original indigenous people of this country and this continent. And there's such a vibrant story to be told. And we're getting better on telling that story. But the reality is a lot of our people were wiped out. Millions of indigenous people on this continent were wiped out. And it was, I say that as just the facts. I know that everyone goes through these things. And like I said, it's been happening a long time. It needs to be acknowledged at some point, and there needs to be a healing of this. And as we move forward, I think those things are going to happen. But history books have become absolute. We're in conversations today at this time that we got to quit talking about all these over here. Let's focus on this. And it's how it's been. It's a one-sided narrative. And that playbook of colonization is thick, and it's worked in so many different forms. I was talking to a colleague of mine, and he brought up to me the idea of safety zones. And I was asking him, well, what is that? What does that mean? And he said, well, it's an interesting concept. And he brought up some various writers that wrote about it. And basically that, folks within many of our systems, especially our education systems, speak of this, well, our American Indians can, they can talk about their dances and sing their songs, but we're not going to go much further than that, because this is our history of our country, and we're going to keep it at here. And it causes issues. But I encourage you to look up that term, because there's a lot of literature out there. But controlling the narrative is a big part of what I just said. With folks that control the narrative, they don't want to hear that. And we're here at the Salish Kootenai Tribal PIR Day, and I just wanted to emphasize that point. We need to open up those channels. People are okay. Oh yeah, let some singers come in and dance, and we'll watch from the outside. But we're not okay with, well, let's talk about that dance. Let's dig into this. Let's talk about our land over here, that what happened back in the day over there, and this and that, these stories that make folks a little bit uncomfortable. But I tell you what, it brings an acknowledgement and an understanding. Youth are becoming more interested. They want to know all these sides. Like I said, that detective, they want to see every perception available to them. So for a moment here, I want you all to think of something in mainstream news. What are the stories that they cover in Indian country? Think about it. If you ever hear anything about natives or American Indians, what are the stories that they are sharing at those levels? I'm not talking about our local tribal papers. I'm talking about expanding it out. What do they cover? Who wrote them? Are there natives writing them? Do they have positive or negative connotations? So go ahead and pause this and think about that for a minute. So looking at the imagery I have underneath Leonidas and Xerxes, you see what would be the first Thanksgiving. In a lot of context and a lot of imagery, there is natives lower than non-natives. And there's so much to that. And it depends on the tribe, but that connection to the land is always a very important thing. But there's different kind of stories of Thanksgiving. I don't know if any of you seen The Addams Family. And there's a moment where that, I think it's Wednesday, gives her side of what Thanksgiving is, and it just shakes up the whole presentation, and it's very powerful. And yeah, it can make some people uncomfortable because we've been only hearing one side. But I just encourage everyone to think openly in these ways and realize that there's always two sides, and the more we know, the better we will learn and moving forward together. It's a respect thing as well. So with much of this, we look at stereotypes and misconceptions. And think for a moment, where do we learn them? Stereotypes are hitting us in all levels. Books, news, our family, our movies, our music, our schools. It's constant. And do we believe them? Do we believe the stereotypes and misconceptions? Sometimes, for me personally, yeah, I do. And until I can sit down and visit with somebody and ask them, what other direction do I have? That's why in a lot of the work that we are doing across the state from a tribal perspective, we're trying to get those face-to-face conversations, get people to get to know each other. And when you hear these stories, do you challenge them? Do you question them? Some very, very strong quotes there. Truth is a misconception that lasted centuries. Delusion is truth, which lasted only for minutes. That's strong. Ignorance cannot lead to evil. Misconceptions lead to evil. It is not what people do know, it's what they pretend they do. Misconceptions can really hurt relationships and situations. It's hurting our world today. And you look at assumptions in our relationships and our experiences, the lack of communication can bring a lot of assumptions. And so that's why it's so powerful that you have this Salish Kootenai Tribal PIR Day, where you have folks from the community, folks with the experiences out there, sharing an actual voice and representation of what some may see as misconceptions and stereotypes, to get rid of them, clear them out. Generalization absent uniqueness. I put that down there because we're all unique. within each of our heritage or lineage or whatever you may call it, we all have our own unique life. At a tribal level, you look at the essential understandings, we all have unique languages, cultures, traditions, and you can't generalize. The beauty is in the uniqueness. And one of the best ways to drop misconceptions and stereotypes is face-to-face conversations. I ran regional youth conferences that included areas on and around reservations. I grew up in these worlds. I graduated up in Harlem, and my whole life I've been around or on Indian country in one way or the other. And for those who know me, I'm light-skinned. Most folks don't even know I'm Blackfeet. And it saddened me through my life because I'd sit and listen to folks have stereotypes and misconceptions of those darker than me. They didn't know I was Blackfeet. And it saddened me, and I try to do it in a proper way and share, well, that ain't right. Let me tell you something else. Let me tell you a different side of that story. And sometimes I'd be angry, especially as I was younger. But then I realized folks don't know what they don't know. And how could we be better on educating and dropping ignorance? So much of that comes from face-to-face conversations. Authentic conversations in voice. I gave a presentation for this conference on authenticity and the power of that, the freeing of that within ourselves as individuals, and the power of that working with others, being authentic, no layer of falsehood or making up things, just being who you are. And being authentic is a good thing for us. And how we can be better in our education to discourage stereotypes and misconceptions of ethnic groups, of organizations, of communities, of countries. Getting to know that. I'm big on the face-to-face. If I'm around somebody that I need to, that I may have a stereotype with, I'm always up to ask, hey, they say these things about kind of your histories or your organization. I put that quote from Girl Scouts because that's an interesting quote, and it ties right into stereotypes and misconceptions. A common misconception about the Girl Scout organization is that all we're about is camping and selling cookies. We're far more than that. And that's in organizations. There's a lot of misconceptions of organizations. There's a lot of misconceptions of ethnic groups, one or the other. And it goes both ways. There's nobody that is right or wrong in these things. It's the education of figuring things out and getting to know these different ethnic groups or organizations or communities, like I brought up with Browning. Get into Browning, enjoy yourself, drop all these misconceptions, and you may get teased, or people can read that stuff and they may try to scare some folks at the town pump, but for the most part, it's a great place. All of our communities across the state, Lodge Grass, you go there, amazing, beautiful area. One of the most prettiest valleys you could ever imagine. You go to Lame Deer, strength, beauty, power. It's just absolute piece of heaven there. And you go up north. I love Poplar, Montana, but for years it had the stereotype of being called Stab City. And my buddies, we'd sit and laugh. They're all from there because I was on a high line. We battled Poplar in basketball and football. We battled Wolf Point, and all of these things. You sit and laugh. There's kind of it's funny. There is situations that happen, but it's not as bad as people think. Same with our other countries. I remember when I was on my honeymoon, we're in We're in Mexico, Puerto Vallarta, with my new beautiful wife, and I'm old school. I just kind of like, I don't want to be a tourist. I want to experience things. And I met a guy that was very cool, and we were talking about Biggie Smalls and hip hop and Tupac, and I don't encourage anyone to do it, but I said, hey, I want to go to an authentic Mexican restaurant. I want to go to the real. He said, well, jump in. He had a VW Bug. We jumped in the car. He had an old tape cassette playing Biggie Smalls. My wife and I cruised down. She was freaking out. I was excited, and went to a little hole in the wall and had one of the greatest experiences ever. And it was authentic, but I dropped all these stereotypes and misconceptions. My wife we still laugh about that, but anymore, you just never know. It's not like I'm sitting on here saying to do such things. We all have the freedom to do what we want, but for me, I wanted to know a little bit more. I wanted to experience the real, but I'm also from reservations that get bad names, and I know that there's beauty and strength there, and I wish more people seen that, including our own tribal people, seeing the beauty and strength of our nations. Education can discourage stereotypes and misconceptions. Relationships can conquer them. It takes time. It takes an open mind and a change of mindset. If you're of that community, of that tribe, you have to have a positive mindset on some of the things going around. Curiosity, bravery, courage, but hitting it head on, taking those chances, you do realize that, hey, we're human. We're all connected. Those are our old philosophies. I put that thing on Tori Spelling for those who don't know, and I am putting my age out there a lot in this presentation. She was on 90210, and it ties into social media. That quote I looked at and I was like, wow. It also ties into how some of our youth feel about our own communities, our own tribal nations, because all they read about is the negative. All we talk about, including our own people, is the negative. Trauma, suicide, addiction, abuse. That's all we talk about. And it gets in your head, it gets in your psyche. And that quote on Tori Spelling, my reality is the misconceptions about me. That's where I go directly to youth and say, hey, think for yourself. Understand why, when we go off to college, do we miss home? If you figure that out as a sophomore and look around you and realize you have great beauty and strength in your family, yeah, there's ups and downs, but that's life. We have to have a balance in that stuff. But you have your culture, you have the comfort of all of those things. That's why some of our students come home. They miss it. When you get out in that world, I felt it when I left the Blackfeet Nation. I felt it. And I felt that my whole life until I started to go back home later in life. When I hit Belknap and Harlem, I had that sense again. I had that feeling that, oh, I miss this. Our tribes are just extended families. And then just across the state, it even extends even further. Indian country is a beautiful place, and it's strong and supportive in so many ways, and we often don't look at it like that. So now moving forward, when we're talking about narrative, student, teacher, parent, staff, and administration. Let's go down to a more minute level and look at our school systems. Do we assume things of each other? Students think this way of teachers, teachers think this way of parents, admin think this way of staff, vice versa, back and forth. It's always going. How can we be better at this? It's through sharing our stories. It's through attacking these assumptions and misconceptions that we may have of each other. Have a conversation, get a cup of coffee, open up the old teacher's lounge that has coffee stains on the table, and sit down and visit. Anymore, you have to like mandate that to get people in the same room, which is sad, but it leads to relationships and connections. Have fun together. Sometimes on social media, we hear the true stories. You have teachers and staff and students and parents. Boy, they dump it out on Facebook. If you want to know the gossip, you go to Facebook. I was in a meeting with students over in Fort Belknap, and we had a few losses up there, suicide, and I knew quite a few of the young men involved, and it's heartbreaking. I knew them very well, and they were doing a roundtable with some of the students and saying, what can we do better? How can we lift this negativity out? And it was very interesting. The students said, adults need to quit posting all of their baggage and garbage and drama on Facebook. It weighs on us. And then we see them in their professional positions, and we have to take them serious after I know everything about their relationship down to the detail. I wish adults quit putting drama on Facebook. That was their number one issue. And you think about that, and we look at that. Facebook has really opened up a whole different level of storytelling, and it gets scary. It's new. And then like you see folks after you've read everything about them, you see them out in the real world, and they act like you probably never read their post, or they act like everything's fine. And you're like, I read your post. Are you all right? It's so interesting now. But what I'm talking about is those healthy interactions, getting around and visiting in healthy levels. That quote, before you start to judge me, step into my shoes, walk the life I'm living. And if you get as far as I am, just maybe you will see how strong I really am. I was in a situation, in a relationship before I married my wife now, and it was a rough one. I had a child with my ex, and I remember how difficult it was. And there was a moment when I was in the early part of my second marriage that my wife now was saying, she was complaining about a situation that we were in. And I told her, I said, you don't know how bad this can get. This right here is nothing. You don't know how bad this can be. And she looked at me and she said, why do I have to? Why can't we just communicate? Why can't we just have each other's back? Why can't you trust me? I trust you. And it changed my life, and so many of these misconceptions that we may have of each other, we're never going to be able to walk in each other's shoes. And everyone has their different ways of dealing with situations. Some can deal with a ton. Some can deal with practically small things they can't handle. And so, again, we can't judge. We're all unique. But sitting down and creating conversations, sharing our stories is one of the key ways to build those positive relationships. It starts within us, starts with the individual, then up. In all of the work I've done, that's where I've always come. And I think it's athletically driven, because if you want to be a good basketball player, you got to put time. You got to put time in your game. You got to learn to dribble left, right, ball handling drills. You got to learn to shoot. You got to learn to jump, to run, to rebound. All of these things, to make passes correctly. All these things you do individually. And the more you work on yourself, the better basketball player you're going to be. Then you may be lucky to have teammates that work just as hard as you. You come together and you build a team. You look at this chart with Maslow compared to some of the Blackfeet Nation. Maslow spent time with the Blackfeet Nation, and he's seen that it starts with an individual first, then it moves up into the community, and then you get the full cultural perpetuity where it's expansive, it's around. I always equate that to a team. Start with yourself, you work on your game, you have others doing the same thing, you come together, you have a leader that's saying, okay, this is our goal, let's shoot for it. You all agree. You may not like each other, but you've practiced enough that you respect the skills that this one has or that one has, and you move forward. That's how it is. And I think that as we move on in our work, those are some pretty powerful philosophies to follow. Because once you do that, you start, you take care of yourself, you honor what you've been given, you live a healthy life, you're strong, you're a loving father, mother, or a respectful child, an honorable person. And yeah, you make mistakes, but you learn, you bounce back and forth because you got support. These type of things leading up into the community, to the tribe, to the state, the nation, the world, need to happen more often, but it starts with us. So moving forward, I'm going to talk about that concept. Individual stories and narrative. What we have going on is quite a few different circle structures around restorative practice. Again, these are philosophies that come from Indian country, from their indigenous ways. You sit around in a circle, everyone gets a say, including the children. Everyone has a say. And they've created this concept of restorative circles or relational circles, but that's the basis of it. Within those circles, you can have a topic, and you can create a discussion around that topic. You share bits of yourself. You become vulnerable. When you're vulnerable, you build trust, and you start all those out. You set it all up. You prepare, so you're not just jumping into circles. And individual stories are shared. You can even say, what's said in here stays in here. I want everybody to feel comfortable. You can start with the smudge. You can start with the song. You can start with an elder or a ceremonial person or a prayer or whatever, which way you want to do it. But it keeps it within that circle to build that relationship with each other. Hearing these stories is creates those connections. And within our school systems, once a week, set time aside for these things. Get to know each other. Get to understand what makes each other tick. Yeah, that takes time, but it pays off in the end. Having those authentic conversations. If an adult is vulnerable, shares a story that he learned something great from, you see those kids perk up. You see it when it's authentic and from the heart. And they may take a little bit further step forward when they want to share their side of their story. The individual story and narrative can be in writing projects. It can be in English class or creative writing. Tell your story. And then we'll get around in a circle and you all can share them. These relational conversations are very powerful. That circle is very powerful. We have books that we use, a Circle Forward book, which we provide through a restorative trainer that we're doing across the state. We'll be doing more of those. We've had to move virtually, but that book has every topic and every situation you can imagine. And it's all about healing. It's all about balancing things out. The wrong was done here. Let's look at building up in a positive way to to balance it out, to heal that wound. Of course, there's protocol in place. Venting is healing and understanding. To let somebody talk and listen objectively with empathy is one of the most powerful things we can do in life. And it's free. These two quotes: owning our story and loving ourselves through that process is the bravest thing we'll ever do. If we can share our story with someone who responds with empathy and understanding, shame can't survive. Shame is a very, very powerful negative thing upon us. So looking at these places, starting with the individuals, starting with that close relationship from the core, how does that move up into the school? What is the story and the history and the narrative of the school? You can open up those conversations. You can offer safe places, invite in elders and parents and so on and so forth. Get food. These things do take time. Sometimes you'll have two people show up. But as I've always learned, those who are meant to be there are there. And the more you do it, the more you have youth leading these type of narratives. We want to know the stories of our families and friends and our community. Elders can help bring guidance to such things and always encourage authenticity. Everyone has their own realities, and to get to know those realities is a very, creates a safe place of trust and acknowledgement, especially if you're respecting it and you're not going out and gossiping about, hey, you know what this guy said? You respect it. And it feels good to do that. That's one of the best things in the world. But elders can lead some of these things. You know, I encourage that at every level. Follow the protocol of that. Maybe bring tobacco, whatever the tribe does in those protocols. You can ask folks, or if you know, you can share that knowledge with others. Zoom has opened up a ton of possibilities with parents. We used to do parent-teacher home visits, and it was always difficult because parents didn't want teachers to come into their house. They were kind of embarrassed about it. And I understand. My house is, especially if I have kids sleeping over, my house is just in shambles. But Zoom offers the opportunity to get to know our teachers. It's technology in this evolution of relationships that can be very powerful. Collaborative connections, conversations to consultation, you know, working with those parents and community members to help bring change in your school, to give them a voice, to have them have buy-in. It's very foundational when you do such things. Share histories and celebrate growth. I wanted to talk about that a little because it involves some of our cultural work. I was in an incident at a school where, you know, through colonization, through boarding schools and all of these different things, many of our tribes were scrambling to keep what they had. Some of them borrowed from other tribes, borrowed other traditions. And it's kind of coming back, but at that moment, we were helping each other out as we move forward. There was a situation where smudge was lit, and it was sage. Blackfeet don't light sage, we light sweetgrass. We cleanse ourselves off with sage. And this is something that I've learned the last 2-3 years. I didn't know these things. And so it came up. Those who kind of went strictly Blackfeet were saying, well, hey, you know, we don't do that, you know. And so this energy was starting to happen. And this young Blackfeet man who knew the language completely fluently said, hey, well, to fix this, why don't we talk about this? Why don't we talk about why some of us use this and some of us use that? And an elder once told me that, hey, prayer is prayer. As long as these good things and these good energies are coming out and you're connected to Creator or whatever, which way you want to go, it's good. We can't judge. We can't tell who's doing this or who's doing that. it's good. And so just having that conversation and talking about the reality that we live in can be healing. It can bring balance, and it's braiding these two worlds together. I always encourage when such things are going on to have an elder involved, a facilitator, an elder that's opened to these understandings of how we're evolving and moving forward. And again, that book, that Circle Forward book has many things. Um, Within our school stories and narratives, when people share out, let's do some celebrations. You know, if parents are sharing out or being a part of something, connecting more, being vulnerable, celebrate that stuff, acknowledge it. If students are doing it, if teachers and staff acknowledge this, because as I've always done with our youth conferences, is if any young man or young woman grabs the mic, I always started off, said, I don't want to hear nothing negative about what these young men or women are going to do or say or sing. It takes a lot of guts to get up and talk. So let's support them. Let's support each other. And we need to do that more at every level. But these celebrations can be pretty amazing things. I work directly with the Montana, Wyoming, Montana Indian Athletic Hall of Fame. I'm looking at working with Wyoming to help them create theirs too. That's why that popped in. But acknowledging some of the greatest athletes and teams who rarely have gotten that is one of the most fulfilling, amazing experiences that I've had. And we could do that at every level. I've often worked with youth on writing in journalism. We have amazing teachers that do journalism. Let's tell positive stories of our community. Say a parent shared something, an old story about their great grandfather. Let's write a story about that, put it in a local paper. We have the ability to write our own and tell our own stories, create our own narrative. And strength-based subjects can bring great pride in the community. School broadcast, you know, there's so many different kind of things that we can do. Celebrating the stories within our school system, creating that positive narrative, that pride. You have blogs, you have radio stations you can tie kids into, and really it's up to the teachers to help support these things. I know students want to do it. Students can create their own internet station if they want, create their own video vlog, blog, you know, whatever it may be, podcast. There's all kinds of avenues to start to share our positive stories of our community, not how others see us and talk about us, but how we feel, how we experience, how we love our community and each other. Those things can be controlled and sent out for others to hear. That moves on into community and tribe, writing our own stories for publication. I am from a family that is linked directly to the Washington football team. I wrote my own story. I wrote my own op-ed because everyone misquoted, and I wanted to do it in a way that was a strong, strength-based way about that situation. So I did it myself, and it was freeing because I had been misquoted so many times. And you know, we need to do that more often within our own tribal nations, our own communities. Send in an op-ed. Until we're running high-level newspapers within our state, op-eds can be directly telling our strong narrative and story from a strength-based perception. Choose the good, choose the strength. There's enough of the negative. Everybody knows the negative. And when I asked you to think of a story that is a nationwide or statewide story, what is it they talk about? Or what can you think of stories written about our native communities? They're usually pretty negative. They're dealing with negative situations or sad situation, grief, or they're about sports. That's my opinion. I don't know what you wrote, but um, we can start to tell it. We have avenues that we can tap into that can lead to some great stories. Um, the Flathead Youth Initiative, the students wanted to put those positive messages. That's that picture up top there. That's our Blackfeet Nation and our teepees. And I apologize, I didn't have a Salish and Kootenai tribal ceremony or teepee line up, but you have Shadow Devereaux there. The initiative that the Salish Kootenai tribes are doing around COVID education by using our indigenous hip hop artists is absolutely phenomenal. It's them telling their stories. And I love that they're going directly to their indigenous protections, their elders, their tribe. It's something that's not out there. Hip hop has very different avenues to take. A lot of them are not connected like our tribes are. And what those young men and women are doing are celebrating and sharing out who we are. This ain't about us. It's about our people. It's about our elders. It's about the knowledge they hold. It's about our stories and our culture, traditions. And there's different ways we can do that, but that right there is one of the most powerful things I've seen. It doesn't get as much love as I would think, but we're still dealing with lateral oppression. So there's a lot of haters out there, but we'll get through it. I love the energy there. I also put podcasts down there. There was a recent podcast on the Lodge Grass Indians and their coach, Josh Stewart, and the methods and the philosophies he brought to his students that changed the entire culture of the Lodge Grass High School and community. He brought in the alum. He told the kids, first off, you take care of home, class, gym. When you go home, you help your parents, you clean the house, you do your chores, you take care of your brothers and sisters, you help them, you're a good role model. When you come to school, you make sure all your schoolwork is done, that your classwork is handled. Then, once all that's done, then you hit the gym. Then we work on our fundamentals, our practice, our game plan, and we work at it. It led him to a state championship, or as they say in COVID terms, a co-championship. I think that they were heading for the title myself, no questions to that. They'll probably repeat this year because they're coming from that area. They're not letting people talk about Lodge Grass like, oh, geez, there's old Lodge Grass. They're talking about the strength and beauty of that community. And the kids know that. They're thriving off it. They're feeding off it. And it's a beautiful thing. Look it up. Maybe I'll add it in the links to check out. So steps forward. I know I've went a little bit over, but I've kind of talked a lot. I myself like to tell stories, and be authentic in these stories is makes it even more excited. But steps forward, there's hopes and dreams around all this. I know we all have that. We want our students to live and thrive and grow old. We want our communities to see the resiliency, fight through it, become healthy. And it starts with so many of these type of approaches that we're saying. Controlling the narrative is individuals. Let me tell you my side of the story. It's healing. It's you drop that shame at times. It's such an amazing thing. And those who are listening connect, they care, they have empathy. I'm gonna go to war for you because I respect you. I respect that you shared that. Understandings of each other. It happens from a youth level to a teacher-youth relationship, to a teacher-teacher relationship, to administration to teacher relationship, to parents linked in through students, to the teachers, to the admin, to the community, to the elders, and it expands. It's like that wraparound philosophy. It's like that community raising the child philosophy. These things are in place, they work. And yes, we have a long way to go, but why not give it a shot? I know that many of you already are. And sharing those cultures and oftentimes stereotypes and misunderstandings we have of each other, both ways it happens. Sit down and share your culture, share this, and be open to understanding that stuff. It brings a balance. It creates healthy lifestyle when you're able to dump out through story or through an honest, authentic conversation with someone who cares. You dump out all of that negative that you're feeling, because it sits down there and it stews. Some people will drink alcohol to keep it down, or do drugs, or get in bad relationships, or become abusive or are abused because they don't deal with it. It sits there and it stews, and it creates negative within our body and our spirit. Talking those things out consistently with somebody you trust, and it heals people. I've seen it time and time again. And being accountable for our actions and humble. Yes, I did that. That's what the restorative circles are all about. Let's restore balance. You did something. You know it was wrong. Yeah, I know it was wrong. So what are we going to do to bring balance? Well, I'm going to work with that teacher. I'm going to work with that fellow student. Or in a lot of cases, you can't even get him in the room. So the solution is, I'll walk on the other side of the hallway when I see that student. I'm going to change classes, go see your counselor and say, hey, I got to get out of these classes. We don't get along. So it's common sense, but maintaining balance. This isn't a kumbaya setting. I understand realities. And to move in these ways, discipline and drive is absolutely necessary. And to have more appreciation for each other, to lift each other up when something is shared to you. Thank you for sharing that. I've been in situations where somebody is suicidal and they're telling me some things that I would almost guarantee they'd never told anyone else in their life. I always say, I am honored that you trust me enough to share that with me. Now, let's get through this. Let's figure out what we're going to do, because inside I'm freaking out. But if I think of it in that way, wow, somebody is sharing some of the most painful things with me. They trust me. I'm sitting here listening. What an honor. And you see that person light. You see that lift off of their chest, at least in that moment. Then you can get them to a place where their mind's a little bit more clear, and you can guide them in the right direction. Let's go see your grandma. Let's go see this or that, or you want to go to the hospital, whatever it may be. But flipping that script on, it is such an honor to hear other stories, especially if it's a tough situation that they've never shared. What an honor, and what a great responsibility we are as listeners. I know that school systems, we have so much happening, but putting away time to do these things can make the biggest difference. Celebrating each other more often, having ceremonies of celebration or ceremonies of healing, from our traditional knowledge keepers to which way you want to follow. Bring it up. It needs to happen more. Love is one of the most powerful things you could ever ask for. Blackfeet Wayward, I have come to understand, because I always heard the stories that they were the raiders of the plains, and their territory was ginormous. But everything that I've learned from our elders is that we based it on ultimate love of each other, love of ourselves, love of our people, love of our territories. That's why we were protective of such things. It made me look at it all completely different. I used to think, oh yeah, we based everything on love. It was protective. And having that mutual respect by sharing stories can do some amazing things. And you see those walls fall. as we start to knock down the silos that we often put ourselves in because we don't talk or communicate to each other. So those are some of the steps forward. There is books and links that I will send to the Salish Kootenai Tribal Ed Department. I will also keep folks involved if we have any trainings of this, but you don't need a training to sit down and get to know each other. You may need to allot some time in the schedule, but with Zoom, with the state of things, that's what we could work on. If kids are struggling with math and we can't sit face to face, check on them and do it in a healthy way. Always understand self-care. Don't overdo it. Don't make sure you're in a good place when you do such things. But that's kind of my presentation. I went way over time, but telling our stories and controlling the narrative is something that we all can do and we need to get better at, especially representing Indian country. There's not enough positives being told about our people. And I think it's time we start to tell it. What a better opportunity than now. So thank you for all you do and enjoy the rest of your conference.